All right. So we're super excited. So today we have what I think is just will be one of my favorite sessions. I love like learning how to do things more efficiently. I'm notorious for figuring things out just enough to get by and then not always knowing the best way to do it. And so then when people in my world give me like the best way to do it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so much easier. So anyway, I'm excited about this class. We've got Kelly Evans with us. Kelly is an agent at Choice, and she's also a transaction coordinator. She's been a TC on a large team. She does it with agents now at Choice. So she's got a ton of experience in this space. She's passionate about that side of the business. And when she joined, she's like, "Well, I want to be an agent here, but I don't want to sell houses. I really love the TC side of things." And want to kind of pour into that. And she's been great. She's actually even made some suggestions. There are some things we do at Choice where she's suggested things to Kelly Seeley and myself. And so there are some things we've done based on her suggestions. So even at the brokerage level, she's really contributing a lot. We've also got Allie Fry with us. Allie, of course, as you know, with Movement Mortgage. The goal today is to share some tips and tricks to help your business be more efficient and to help reduce some pain points, some points of frustration that can exist. And of course, on the mortgage side, there are things that can come up, some things that are unavoidable, but there are things we can do to set expectations and prepare clients and help prevent some of that stuff ahead of time. And in that same vein, we've got Kara Gibbons with us with Sterling Law. She runs the new Apex branch of Sterling Law, so we're super pumped. I'm sure she's sitting down there right now. I see like the Sterling blue behind her. So, in that same vein, what is it from the lender's perspective that will help that the things that they see that can go wrong or that cause frustration, and what can be done to help prevent some of that. And yes, I do realize that I look like I'm, in the shadows, like you're not supposed to see my face. Obviously, you can tell I'm doing this from home because I have my notorious morning sun on my face. So, but with that, I don't want to steal the thunder of what they're going to be talking about today. So I want to just turn it over to you, Kelly. I'll let you introduce this, and we can jump right in.
Great. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming this morning. I know it's hard to take an hour out of your busy week, so thank you. And Brian did all the introductions, so that's half of what I was going to do, which is fabulous. But coming from contribution, I thought this would be a fun way to just dedicate some time to this part of the business. Especially including a lender and attorney perspective, because we want to provide information to them that's going to help our client and our transaction. And we want to empathize with their point of view in transactions. So we don't have a strict agenda. We didn't do slides because we thought it would be better just to have the conversation and see some faces. But it'll really be in four parts. We'll start with the attorney perspective. Kara Gibbons, she's so generous with her time. And then we'll do the lender perspective with Allie Fry with movement. Again, thank you. So generous with your time. And then third part will be just maybe going over some best practices with Dotloop and Suite Assist, sort of on a surface level. And then fourth part would be sort of a maybe some 10 top expectations I like to set for buyers and sellers. And depending on time, it may be more like 6, 8, 10 expectations. But I'm grateful for your time. And I think, Kara, we'll just turn it over to you if that's good.
Yeah, I decided to turn off my mute and I turned off my video. Okay, I'm here. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here. So, what Kelly and I kind of talked about on what we're going to kind of focus my piece on is the part of the process that you guys become most involved in, I would say, and things that happen before it gets to me. And if it's done wrong before it gets to me and it has to double back to you, you guys don't like then doubling back to your clients. Nobody likes reinventing the wheel. Everyone wants to look good. So I want to make you guys look good from the beginning and we can all kind of flow on the train together. I love what Brian said at the beginning about efficiency. That is where I live. If I could find a better way to do it, I will do it. I don't think I do everything perfect. So when I learn a new thing, I implement it, maybe tweak it, make it my own. But if I can do things faster, more accurately, and more efficiently, then I could do more volume and I can make more money. So that's where my mind always is. So I kind of did this with the RRAR about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was really successful because what I was teaching wasn't just towards agents that are new. Even the most seasoned agents mess this kind of stuff up. So don't kick yourself. Some people just don't know it. You might have never experienced it. So it's one of those things that when you experience it once, then you just start doing it right. But until you experience it, and it could take years in your business before you get to that point, you just don't know what you don't know. So we'll start first with what we want to talk about when it comes to drafting the contract properly. That's what I want you guys to do first and foremost and right, because going back to your client and having to revise a contract is never a fun thing to do because you're going back to your client and you're also going back to the other side of the transaction. So everyone looks kind of bad. All the clients are frustrated. We don't want that to happen. So the biggest mistakes we see with contract drafting come when the contract, when the property is owned by something other than an individual, be it a corporation, an LLC, a trust, an estate. It's always usually messed up in some way. So first, we'll talk about the kind of the easiest one of the group, and that's your trust. So a trust is an entity. So it's always going to be on the entity side of the signatures. And then the name of the seller is the name of the trust. So if it's the Kara Gibbons Revocable Trust, you put as the seller Kara Gibbons Revocable Trust. Signature side on the signature page, it's I'm signing on the entity side, but you don't know for sure that the person who could sign for the Kara Gibbons Revocable Trust is actually Kara Gibbons. I might have made it somebody else. So you need to always ask your client for a full copy of the trust before you draft any documents, because you need to know who the actual signer of the trust is, and that's the trustee of the trust. The trustee could be one person, it could be 3 people. So you have to look at the trust and figure out who has signing authority. And you actually don't have to be the one who figures that out. You could say, hey, Kara, shoot that over to me and be like, here's a copy of my client's trust. Who signs for it? And then let me tell you the right person. And then you go back to your client because your client actually might be wrong. So sometimes it's a husband and wife, and the husband's like, I can do it. I'm one of the trustees, and I'm the only one who's needed to sign. But your client could be wrong. The way the document could be drafted, it could be drafted in such a way that it does require 2, maybe when it's the sale of real property, there could be nuances within the trust that they might not even be fully aware of. So let the professional, let the attorney look at it real quick before you draft all the paperwork and then have to double back on them. And they're going to need to give a copy of their trust anyway once they go under contract. So it's also then getting your paperwork in line ahead of time. So whenever the attorney that's closing the transaction asks for it, you have it handy and it just gets shot right out. So then you decide who can sign for the trust, and then that person or people sign on the entity side as trustee. So it's their name, comma, trustee. Next would be our LLCs and corporations and things like that. So same thing, it's an entity. So it's XYZ LLC. Your seller is XYZ LLC. The signature page is on the entity side. Now you need to know who has authority to sign for XYZ LLC. It's not always what you find on the Secretary of State's office. So if you just go on the public record, Secretary of State Corporate Division, and search for the LLC, you're going to find a number of things, but most of the time you're not finding what actually is needed to provide actual signature authority, which is their operating agreement, because the operating agreement is not something that has to be public record. So if your client is a company, same thing, you need to ask them for a copy of their operating agreement before you draft any documents. Because again, your client might be Joe, and Joe's the one you talked about. Joe owns this company. He says he's the only one there. Come to find out, after we're under contract, we finally see the operating agreement, and Joe is only one of the members. There's 3 members. And actually, I need all 3 members. So now we're doubling back. So again, you want to make sure you find that. There are some people who create their LLCs off of LegalZoom. That's fine, but they probably didn't do an operating agreement. They probably have no formal corporate documents. which is fine most times. But when you go to try to sell real property, you got to kind of be a little formalized. So they then will need to have a corporate resolution prepared by an attorney, someone like me or whoever, I don't care, needs to draft them a corporate resolution that is signed by all the members or signed by all the parties who own the company, whatever kind of company it is, where they all agree that one or all of them have authority to sign on behalf of the company. So they either have to have that in place already or create one for the closing. And if they own multiple properties, they can use that document for multiple transactions. So it's one thing where it's like, all right, you formed this LLC because you were buying a bunch of investment properties. Now you're selling them off. You never created anything. Well, this is good. We're creating it now. So now for the next time you sell a property, you're already good to go. So you also look like you're providing value to your client and you're giving them the information that LegalZoom did not give them when they created their LLC. So that's the other one. The one that gives me the most headaches, that keeps me up the most at night, is the estates. When people are dead. When people are dead, it makes everything a whole lot harder. So we want to make sure that when someone's dead, you guys have the right people signing for the estate. I will tell you 99% of the time, it is not the estate of the dead person. Please do not put that on the contract. If you put just the estate of the dead person, that is going to be wrong. And also, please don't put the seller as the dead person. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a contract and then I'm halfway through intake and finally I'm like, wait a minute, it has this person, but somebody else signed for that person. I was like, what's going on? They're like, oh, yeah, so-and-so's dead. I'm like, then why did you make him the seller on the contract? Like, dead people can't sell property. Come on. And also, POAs die when somebody dies. So if you have a POA for somebody, but that person is now dead, you cannot sign for them anymore. I wish I didn't have to say that out loud. So when it comes to dead people, and this is why I don't do estate planning. My couth is like small because I just look at this as like pieces of a puzzle. So when someone dies, we need to know a number of things. Did they die with or without a will? God rest their soul. Did they die with or without a will? Is the estate opened or closed? Did they have how did they own it? Did they own it as tenancy by the entirety? Is their spouse still living? There's a bunch of questions. And I will tell you that a lot of times estate attorneys give them, I'm not going to say give the people in those situations bad advice. They just give them not full advice because estate attorneys are looking in one lane. They're not in the real estate lane. It's like asking a brain surgeon to do heart surgery. We know what we know in our lanes, and sometimes they don't overlap. So a client comes to me and goes, well, my state attorney told me that I just needed the executor to sign in order to sell it. That's usually not true, but their estate attorney might have told them that. So now I'm another attorney coming into the mix, giving them different advice. So there are some times where we have to be kind of hard lines, like, okay, I know your attorney, like, let me call your estate attorney then. They might not practice real estate law and realize I actually need the heirs. And because the estate is still open, there's some nuance with the will, something that's going on there. So anytime there is an estate, it's always best to talk to an attorney before you draft any documents. You want to make sure that we give you the right parties are executing everything, because a lot of times is if one of maybe the siblings or something, there's a contentious family issue and this sibling maybe like lives in California and hasn't talked to anybody in 20 years, but we need them to sign. We want to know that before you get under contract, because then that creates a whole big mess to get us down the road. Minors also cannot sell real property. So finding out that the heirs, like if somebody passed away in their 40s and they didn't have a will, now they're heirs are their spouse and their children, and all their children are babies, it makes things very complex and hard. And you want to get all your ducks in a row before you go under contract. So the long and the short of it is, make sure you talk to an attorney before you do anything when it comes to an estate. And also, don't trust the word of the listing agent. If the listing agent says to you, "Oh yeah, here's how you write the contract," and then you submit the offer, you can ask questions of the listing agent. You could say, "All right, well, you're telling me that I'm supposed to write the contract in the name of the estate of Kara Gibbons. Who's signing for the estate? Did you guys talk to an attorney? Are there any heirs?" Like, I just want to make sure that we don't have to then double back. You're not doing anything wrong. You're advocating for your buyer client, and you're actually advocating for the entire transaction, not just your buyer in that situation. It's okay to ask, "Hey, what kind of legwork did you do here? Where are we at to make sure that the contract is written properly from the giddy up?" And you're then not having to tell your buyer, "I'm sorry, we now can't close because the seller side hasn't even opened the estate yet, and the guy died a year ago." And now you're looking at a 4-month close instead of a 40-day close. So just be very careful with that. I will say that the commission prepared a pretty good estate flow chart for you guys. It's in the contract documents that you have from the commission. It's one of their little exhibit things. It gives you enough to kind of be dangerous and kind of follow the flow chart to when you're in a listing appointment, you can kind of be like, "All right, well, it looks like we're going to need this, but you know what? Let me talk to my attorney first and double back to make sure there's nothing else that we need to worry about." So it gives you that kind of feeling that you're providing the value already, but then you have your bat phone and you could text me real quick and I could say, "Yeah, Kelly, you are right. You were right the first time, so perfect. Take it back, and you read the flow chart perfectly." Just to make sure, I want to make you guys look good. So I saw one question real quick. So I know I talk fast too, so you can always slow me down. I have a seller whose husband passed, and now the house is owned by the wife and her sister. Wake County still has all three listed. What does the seller need to provide the closing attorney besides the death certificate? It would depend, Mindy, on a couple of things. So first, it's if the seller whose husband passed away, now the house is owned by his wife and sister. Not quite sure why the sister's involved. Was she on title with them initially? Did the husband and wife own it by tenancy entireties? There's just a couple little clarifying questions with that. If you want to email me, I can look at it specifically for you and give you that exact answer, just to tell you what you need beside a death certificate, because it sounds like there's just a little bit more involved there because it wasn't full tenancy by the entireties properties. All right. I know I talked fast, but only 15 minutes, so I'm going to go more, give you as much value as I can. So that was kind of contract drafting. Next, we're going to talk about kind of buyer and seller intake forms. I know everybody loves intake forms. I love intake forms. I love when agents express to the client how important intake forms are. I can't do my job without them. So I know nothing about the client until they complete intake. There's no way for me to know their forwarding address, their social security number, their full legal name, if they're in bankruptcy. Like, there is no way for me to know kind of any of that until you provide intake. And I can't do my job until the intake is received back, mainly because I have no idea. Like, I could find that there's payoffs in the title work, but I can't order a payoff until I have seller intake back that gives me the loan number, the loan servicer, and the seller's social security number. I don't ask for anything more than I need. I know there's a lot of clients that get a little crazy when it comes to filling out the intake. Like, why does the attorney need my social? Why does the attorney need all of this? I'm not in the business of stealing identities. I promise you that. I would have quit this practice 10 years ago if that's what I was doing. There's just so many things that I need and attorneys need. We don't ask for more than what we want. Is definitely not safe to email social security numbers. Don't do that. I just saw that question come through. Always fill it out on the intake and complete it through a secure portal with whatever your attorney was working with. If it's not coming and going through a secure portal or secure channel, send it back without the that sensitive information and call the office and give that sensitive information to them over the phone. That's a safe way of doing it. Just make sure that's always handled in the most protective means. And a lot of people, there are some people who don't like to use those secure portals because they don't think they're secure. That's okay. Print it off, handwrite it all, use a fax machine. I don't care. Fax it over if they feel like that's safer. Hand deliver it. I love having people walk into my new beautiful office. Come and say hello and hand me your intake form. Just give me your intake form. That's all I want. The one thing with the intake forms that is also important is HOA information. Contrary to some popular belief, there is actually no online HOA database. Like I can't log in and be like, all right, this property address is in this HOA and this is what the dues are. I rely on what the seller provides me. There is no way for me to verify anything until the seller tells me, yes, I'm in an HOA. Yes, these are the amount of my dues. Here's my management company, and go ahead and order the pay, like the certification. I have no idea how to do that until the seller gives me that info. So that's another important piece that really stops me from moving forward until I get those intake papers back. So when people call me and they're like, hey, Kara, can you do a quick cash close? I can do my part very quickly, but my part is very dependent on everybody else doing their part very quickly. So how fast can the seller get me intake back is how fast I can turn around this closing. So it's not really necessarily the title. It's everybody else kind of doing their part to get us to the finish line. So I'll double on the HOA stuff while we're kind of down that train with intake. When it comes to all of the dues and the transfer fees and everything, transfer fees tend to be the biggest fight when it comes with sellers because they don't realize how hefty some of these transfer fees are until they see the closing statement. And to be quite honest, I agree with them. I'll get on a soapbox all day and say these HOAs are a racket. It should not cost $250 for them to send me a piece of paper to say the dues are up to date and we can now transfer this to the buyer. I know it sucks. I know it also sucks that a lot of these management companies want paid in advance. Like we have to prepay for that in order for them to send it to us. So it's not even paid on the closing statement. I have to get the seller on the phone to order it for me. And then if it's not ordered 10 business days prior to closing, it's a rush and we're going to pay an extra $100. So I get it. It's setting those expectations though with your client first, that it's not Kara charging those fees, please, because so many people yell at me and my staff. And I'm like, promise you it's not. It's the HOA. And they're like, well, my dues are only $250 a year. Why am I paying a $250 transfer fee? I don't know. Call HRW. They're the ones doing it. So the thing is that the sellers, though, they're the ones paying this on the way out and then nothing changes. So that's the problem with these things, is that sellers are like, fine, screw it, I'll pay it. They leave and then nothing ever ends up changing with the management company because no one's now on fire mad to go make any changes at the next meeting of the homeowners. But those are fees and everything that do need paid by the seller. Make sure you prep your client when you're asking your client on a listing how much their dues are and how frequently they are billed, so you can fill out the disclosures. Have them call the management company and say, hey, what are your certification and transfer fees as well? I'm getting ready to sell my house. How much are you going to charge me? And then they can give that information too. So that's coming ahead of when they get the Alta 2 days before closing and then are now on fire mad and didn't anticipate another $300 coming off their bottom line. And last, as I am now looking that I've been talking almost, no, I'm okay. The last one will be taxes. We all love to talk about taxes. So taxes are a little bit different every time of year you close. So we're closing now. If you're closing now in March, it'd be basically any time from January 1 until when tax bills come out. What you're seeing on your closing statement is a credit from the seller to the buyer for their part of the anticipated bill that's coming out in 2025. So seller's always giving a credit to buyer January through when tax bills come out. Once tax bills come out, we're always paying the tax bill at closing, and it's going to be split. It's going to be prorated on a calendar year between buyer and seller. And then after the seller has paid the bill, maybe we're closing in the fall, September, October, November. Now buyer's crediting seller back because seller already paid for the year. Now buyer's giving the money back from like October to the end of the year if they closed in October. But the biggest part of all of that I'm saying is that it's prorated on a calendar year. Our contracts say prorated on a calendar year. Bills get mailed out on a fiscal year. I get so much kickback, mainly from people who don't have escrow accounts, mainly from people who own their house outright or they pay their tax bill themselves because they are convinced that they have paid their bill through June, not through January. So I have so many fights, and then Wake County, I'm on a list over there because how many times I called and yelled at them because they tell people when they call, like I have these sellers call and go, I just talked to Wake County. Wake County said I am paid through June of 2025. You are stealing my money. I assure you I'm not stealing your money. First off, you can't pay through June of 2025. The 2025 bill hasn't even come out yet. And then I go on this like exhaustive talk, and sometimes if the agent is on my, like the listing agent has been doing this a long time and can kind of talk their client off the ledge, that's great. And sometimes I have the listing agent jump in on it and are giving their client the bad advice too. And I'm like, can you everyone read the contract, please? It is prorated on a calendar year. So when they bought their house, it was prorated on a calendar year. When they sold their house, it's being prorated on a calendar year. They are never paying more than their fair share. That sometimes works, especially if they have a copy of their settlement statement from when they bought. That logic then clicks and they're like, oh, okay. So even though the bill came out like that, I was always paying it on a calendar year. That makes sense. So just kind of have my back on that. Appreciate it. That would be great. And if you have any questions about taxes, let me know. I know with Wake County reevaluations, and now we're in Durham County reevaluations, there's a lot of questions about that. What I will say is the way Wake County did it, I'm anticipating Durham to also do. What I mean by that is because values have gone up so significantly, the anticipation is that they're going to lower the tax rate to make it more of an even, not huge jump. It's going to be more like just a little jump in their bill. So what we're still doing is using last year's bill to prorate now until the bills come out for 2025, because I have no idea what the tax rate is going to be. So I can't anticipate that the Durham bills are all going to be huge jacked up. We have no idea because Wake County didn't do that to the people of Wake County. We knew values doubled, sometimes more than doubled, but that didn't mean their bills doubled because we backed out rates. So that's kind of what our practice is doing. I know every attorney does things a little differently, and that is okay. But it's kind of how you phrase it to the client to make sure that everybody understands. Right now we're in this, especially, well, in Durham County, we're in this kind of weird gray area until they make their decisions with the legislature on how they're going to deal with the rates. Does anybody have any questions to all of my crazy? Oh, Brian doesn't complete intake forms anymore. Exactly. Get yourself an assistant, a great TC like Kelly, and then she'll help get you your intake forms done. You guys don't have to be doing those for anybody. And you also please don't be the middleman don't ever be the middleman for Social Security numbers or wiring instructions. That's a huge thing and a huge liability that you do not need to be taking on. And the last thing that you want to have in your records is that kind of sensitive information, because God forbid your email gets hacked. Then you have to call every client that you've ever had and say, I'm so sorry, my system was hacked and your Social Security number was in it. So don't even ask for it. I love what Taylor just said. We have our clients call and provide it. That is perfect. That is the best way to do it. If they don't feel comfortable inputting that into anyone's secure portal, leave it blank and then call. That's the best way. As long as they call, please have them call. Any questions? Nope. Cool. All right. Oh, you, Allie.
Hey, thank you. That was good info, Kara. To kind of play off her beginning of that is like the trust documents. If you already have them, the lender also needs them too. So if you can help like alleviate the borrower having to send them, since they already have to send us a lot of documents, then, you know, that might be one thing that you can take off their plate as well, and they'd appreciate that, I'm sure. But other things that like I've seen contract wise that, again, like whether you're a first time like new agent or been in the business years, I see it all over the place. Just some reminders, and maybe again you just haven't come across it and you know, dealt with it, and it's kind of new to you. But the addendums, there's so many different addendums, and there's several things that the lender does not want to see, and we do not want to get them. So to alleviate things on your end, there's ways that like you can get around that. But the actual contract itself, like if there's anything in that section that lists all the addendums that you're doing initially, is that page 12, section 14, it lists all of them. Anything that is checked there, or even on that last line where you fill it in, whatever you have there, you have to send in. So the underwriter sees that, and then if it's listed there, we have to get it. So if it's something that we don't want, it might cause some problems or some headaches or just some additional things that you don't want to go through. The biggest one I've seen is when you attach the additional provisions addendum or any kind of like DDRA form or anything like that that says anything, no matter how little it is, about repairs. So there was one I recently got that said adjust the closet doors in the primary to hang evenly and close smoothly. And that, even though it's like not affecting the structure of the house or anything like that, and it's so silly, but that was on there. So we had to get somebody to make sure they sent pictures and invoices or whatever they did to show that it was adjusted and that box was checked. So things like that you can maybe do like offline and, you know, have an agreement that's not actually on the contract would be probably less of a headache for everybody, I'm sure. But just know that if you put anything to do with repairs, it's always going to be, it could be as little as just having a picture provided that it's done, or you know, as much as having like an actual general contractor, some kind of contractor professional with an invoice saying that they, you know, repaired X, Y, and Z or whatever. So that's like the biggest one, I think, that can definitely hold up closing. The other things that I've seen is like the personal property. It's, again, something minor that I know is easy to kind of throw in there, aside from like the normal like washer and dryer and fridge. Those are totally fine. But when you get into even like a mirror or something, like all the little things that might want to be there, but and you don't want to do like an actual sales contract for it because it's something so little. But if it's other than like the washer and dryer and refrigerator, you don't want to put it on the actual contract, because they'll either make you send it back, cross it out, initial it, and again, just things that if you didn't have to do would make it so much smoother for everybody's part. Or if it's, you know, something that needs to be written up as a sales contract. And if it has any kind of like value to it, like they're actually buying it, then it would have to be involved with the appraisal too. So again, things that you just want to like leave out or do on the side and just make life a lot easier. The other addendums I've seen are pretty straightforward. Like we don't see it that much, but the rent back from the sellers, which I mean, I feel like that was more like 2020, 2021. So it's pretty rare these days, but you know, have seen them here and there a couple times recently. But just keep in mind if it is a buyer purchasing for a primary residence that they can't go over that 60-day mark. The buyer has to occupy the house within 60 days. So just kind of keep that date in mind. But I think that's all the addendums. If you guys had any questions about any kind of other addendums that you've seen, you had questions about. Okay, well, if you have any questions about anything, please let me know. Even if I'm not the lender on the transaction, and if you just had a quick question about any of it, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'm happy to kind of guide you through it while you're like writing up the contract. So again, you don't have to go back and forth and redo anything or get anything crossed out and initialed and all of that fun stuff.
So with that though, I do have
yeah,
a question
Sure.
about that, only because it's perfect that you brought this up. And Kara, thank you for sticking around with us. And so this is for Allie and Brian. So we're doing an offer to purchase over a weekend. Maybe there are some repair items that are important to the buyer. So if an agent were to include that in the offer and do the additional provisions and write out a list of repairs, and then come Monday morning, everything's signed, sellers have agreed. Come Monday morning, can we take that offer to purchase, cross out that additional provision, have everyone initial it, and prepare a DDRA? Is there a red flag to the lender when you see an offer to purchase with an additional provision that's been crossed out and initialed? Are they going to say, I still want to see what was on it?
No, I have seen people do that before and they do not require it. I try to be as diligent as possible to look at it first and see, because there's so many different options on that additional provision thing. Like it could be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be repairs. So it doesn't necessarily throw up a red flag at all. It could just be, you know, an expiration time or something, and it would be fine. It would be ideal if
Okay.
you did that before the underwriter got the one without it initialed and then had to get it, of course.
Okay, perfect. I'll just say, oh, go ahead, Brian.
Well, let me just say I've become so cynical over the years, and I always think about what could somebody do that would go wrong? What would something that could go wrong? And so what I would just say is get
Please
that
say.
DDRA signed first,
Yes.
and then initial the removal of the agreement to amend contract, just to prevent a seller who thinks they're very clever and they initial the removal of the additional provisions and then don't sign the DDRA. I don't think most human beings would do that, but better to have your order of operations established correctly from the beginning.
Yeah, no, that's so true though, because I had a situation once where the seller did not want to cross that off and initial it. Or the buyer, vice versa, or something where they didn't want to take it off because they were adamant that it needed to be on the contract to be done. So, and there's some people that want that, like want it on the contract. They do not want to like handle it behind the scenes. And that's totally fine as long as everybody knows that it has to be made sure that whatever it is completed and fixed or whatever, and it's acceptable to the underwriter, which could take some extra time, but as long as everybody's on board with that, then it's totally fine.
Okay.
One,
And in
one
that
more.
same, oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, we just keep cutting you off, Kelly.
No,
I'm sorry.
that's okay.
I was just going to remind people that there is a standard bill of sale now. And it came to my attention this week that the version of the bill of sale, the one that we had created, is still in there. I'm going to take that out so there's no confusion. There is a standard North Carolina bill of sale now. So for all that personal property, just that's obviously not for repairs, but I just wanted to remind people there is a standard North Carolina Realtor form now for the bill of sale. So please use that and not a version that an attorney has created at some point in the past.
We were on the same page. I was just going to say, in that same regard, if someone lists a bunch of personal property that's important to the offer, is it okay if we cross that out? Well, create the bill of sale, get everyone to sign it, then cross it out on the offer to purchase. It's Form 320T is the bill of sale.
Yeah, and we had to do that recently for an Airbnb with which it was like fully furnished, and The only thing with that was that we had to get the appraiser to like agree it was normal and it didn't like skew the value at all, which isn't too much of a big deal at all. So
Hey, Allie, I have a question for you. If you're,
sure.
this is Julie Cherison. I have somebody who has to sign for her brother who is incapable of signing, so she's signing as the guardian. And when we put things together, we didn't know, and so we put both of their names together on the contract. And now they have a special attorney that tells them about all of this. And we have to change the contract. How do you, is there an addendum that you can say that this person is signing for this person on everything? Or do we have to go back to every single line and make that change and initial both sides?
I can answer that. There is no addendum that can change a buyer or seller or property address with the North Carolina standard documents. That needs to be attorney drafted. I have those handy. I have buyer name change, seller name change, and property address correction. So you don't have to cross through an initial every single thing that you've ever gotten
Oh, that's
drafted.
great.
So just let me know. And actually, Kelly, I'll send them to you so you can then distribute them in a whatever means for all choice agents to have handy.
Thank you so much. That's, and I actually need it today. I'll call Kelly up.
You'll get it.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, again, if you come across any kind of addendums you're just not sure about, ask, feel free to ask me, or I mean, obviously Kara will know too as well. The other part of it was the credits that I wanted to talk about real quick. I think I've drilled it into a lot of people's head about the seller credits and that there is a cap, and even with the cap of the percentage, it can't exceed actual closing costs. So whenever there's a large credit from the seller, we want to be, we just want to make sure that we're using all of it and not leaving even a penny on the table. And that could be meaning we have to add closing costs to use it. And that means like we could add discount points or to buy down the rate, or HOA dues, or like inspection fees. And those things all usually come at the last minute. So everybody's kind of scrambling to get all these things to make sure we use the credit fully at the end. And it's usually like the day of closing or like the day before. So just like something to keep in mind, if you get a large credit, we just want to make sure that we kind of have all of our ducks in a row as far as like what invoices and things like that we can use to throw on the CD at the last minute and make sure we get it all on there and use all of it.
Hey, Allie.
Yeah.
So if some of that closing costs is being used to pay a buyer agent, how are you documenting that?
We just have to get that form
The compensation form?
or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we just, yeah, 220. And we have to we just coordinate with the attorney as far as like making sure it's on the right side and everything. So, yep, we've had to do that a couple times now. And come to that point, as far as real estate, like any kind of commission, like rebates as a credit, we always have to get a letter signed by Brian, and, or if it's on the other side, whoever the seller is for the, or the agent for the BIC of the agent who's giving the credit. Again, that's usually last minute. So just kind of keep that in mind. We need that letter if it's going to be thrown on there. There's also a cap there. Any kind of interested party has to have, is the same thing as like the cap for the seller. If you don't have my like handy dandy flyer thing that I sent out a while ago, let me know and I'll send it out again. But because it's based on like the down payment, primary investment. So there's all sorts of different caps there. But commission rebates can be put on there. We just have to have that signed letter stating it's good. And then for temporary rate buy downs, the cost of the buy down is going to need to be fully paid for by the seller. It can be even like $100 and we still need to get it covered. Like the buyer cannot pay any portion of that cost. So I know recently we had to get a commission rebate to cover like $140 or something of it, because the seller wasn't going to budge, but the full amount needs to be addressed. So that's something we can usually catch obviously upfront early on, because we're locking the rate and we know the cost and we know how much the credit is usually at that time when you're doing a temporary rate buy down, and you get it initially on the original contract, the credit. So but just again, just a reminder that we do have to cover that full cost. And if you're in the negotiating process of it all and want to know exactly how much it's going to be based on the borrower's loan amount and what the interest rate is, then you can always reach out and I can do a quick calculation and let you know exactly how much that is going to be, so you can kind of gauge that credit and maybe make it a little bit over that if you can, to cover that. I think that was all on my list. So does anybody else have any other questions about any of the credits or anything?
Thank you so much, Ellie. Anybody have questions? Well, we want to be respectful of everyone's time, make sure we're done in an hour. So I'm thinking we might just touch on Dotloop best practices and Suite Assist. Does that sound good to you guys, Brian, Kelly? Just touch on those? Okay, perfect. While we had this platform, and we were doing contract to close, we thought it made sense to just throw out some Dotloop best practices. And Kara and Allie, thank you guys. You do not have to stick around, but if you want to, that's great. But I want to be respectful of your time. I know you both have real jobs to get to today, so thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm actually sending you some documents, and email me if you need me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Allie. I hope that was okay, guys. I hope you guys didn't have questions for them. I didn't want to take up their valuable time. So while we had this platform, while we were talking contract to close, it made sense to just touch on a couple of Dotloop best practices and Suite Assist best practices. I know we all want to be respectful to Kelly and any future VAs that are working through the compliance. And actually, Brian and Kelly, if you want to take this over, you're welcome to. I have the list that we talked about. And Julie too, just so we're all kind of on the same page of how we talk about Dotloop. But at a minimum, labeling your Dotloop with the address. When you're submitting it, label it with the address, not the buyer's name. It needs to, that way when the check comes in, they know where it goes. That way it's in line with what's in Suite Assist and it's in line with what's in MLS. So the firm knows what's in the pipeline. Submitting your documents for review. So you really are supposed to submit your documents for review multiple times in a transaction, not once it's closed. You're really supposed to submit it probably 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 times. And it's okay that it's sent back, returned to agent. That's what they want. They want to be able to review it in pieces, not all at one time once it's closed. If you can keep the documents in the folder, just the ones that are required, just those documents, and any extra documents put in other folders so that when they're reviewing a folder, they're only reviewing the ones they need to review. Brian, you want to pipe in?
Yeah, I'll just tell you, go through the list. That's good. And if I have a comment, I'll chime in. Just keep
Okay.
in mind that the Real Estate Commission rule is to have your paperwork submitted to the office within 72 hours. Now, we make it 48 hours. Most brokerages make it 48 hours. But it's not just to make the compliance review easier for the person doing it. It's because if something's wrong, it is hopeless if we are getting it the day before closing or after closing. We're asking you to go back and get things initialed and added after closing, and that's frustrating for you. It's embarrassing for you to have to go to the client and get something signed after closing. And if there's something, God forbid, significant, like the wrong people are signing, if there's, we've seen things come in where they never had a valid executed contract and we didn't know about it until after closing. Well, that's all seems good and well because it closed, but not if somebody became unhappy and they sent the contract to their attorney looking for a way out. And lo and behold, you're not even under contract. How do you explain that to your client? This is why we have these checks and balances and these layers of protection. Look, we're not perfect. There are things that we can miss too. But if you've looked at it, we've looked at it, there's a better chance that we're going to catch things that would go wrong. So that's why it's not punishment. It's not just to make our lives easier, although it does make our lives easier. It's because there are reasons for it. So
Yep. Perfect. Yep. And quite honestly, that Dotloop that's the piece. Quite frankly, it's how we get paid. So we want to make sure everything's correct. We want to protect our firm. So
yes,
label.
we don't want to hold your commission back because you haven't gotten an ABA signed or a professional services disclosure. Like we have no interest in that. That money is in an account that I don't get to spend. I don't earn interest on it. It does me no good to have your commission dollars in our commission account. I don't want it there. It makes auditing our account harder. I want that money out of our account and into yours. But and as we are adding additional compliance pieces, by the way, Kelly and I have probably been more lenient over the last almost 7 years because we'll kind of let things fly. But as we bring on other people, their job is not to be lenient. Their job is to follow the structure of a compliance review. And so they'll be less lenient as time goes on. So thank you for doing all this, Kelly. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're ever curious what's needed in a loop, even I didn't recognize this early on. So when you're looking at Dotloop, and again, this is a surface level, I have a feeling there will be a video with some more visualization and maybe some best practices. But when you're looking at Dotloop and you're looking at the folders, and if you scroll all the way down, you'll see little check boxes and the title of each document. And when it's been submitted and it's approved, you'll see that checkbox get checked, and then the ones that are not approved will be unchecked. So either you haven't done it yet because it's just not ready, or you've submitted it, but it was returned, and that checkbox will remain unchecked. So that's a good place to look. If you're like, what am I missing? Scroll all the way down and you'll see each section of what's required for each folder. That might be helpful. And then just real quick, mention that active MLS sheets are due, signed by the client in compliance. And I think that's a piece that gets missed. You're busy, maybe it goes under contract that weekend and you forgot to grab a version of it in active status. But try to grab it in active status and get it signed by your sellers. Sketches are now required in compliance, and the inspections disclosure is now required for buyers. Brian, you want to add to that?
Well, I was going to say the listing, the reason why we have that get signed is so that we have proof that the seller approved that MLS listing. If there is information input there that is inaccurate, the seller has an opportunity to look at that and give you that feedback. So it's just another layer of liability protection for you to say that the seller saw that, approved it. The sketch, I sent an email out about this. You probably already seen my video on it, but we were supposed to be collecting this all along from you guys. I just never did. And it finally got to the point after some issues where I said, okay, well, we now need to start. You should have of course, the agents always had these sketches in your files anyway. The brokerage is supposed to have it. And so now we're just asking you to do what we should have been asking you to do all along. So that's what that's all about. And the inspections and services disclosure, a number of agents were already using that. And I got feedback from a number of agents saying, why don't we require this? There are other brokerages that are requiring something similar that they had created. And so it was like, okay, well, I mean, I realize it's another form, but boy, is it a big layer of protection when a buyer can't come back to you and say, well, I didn't know I could have a blank. Well, yes, you did, because you had 4 pages of what you could have done presented to you on day one. So it's just another layer of protection. And it's a little less cumbersome than the professional services disclosure, which is still required. But this is a little easier. It's just one place for them to sign.
So Brian, I have a question about that because a lot of that information is irrelevant in the new market that I'm in. Like we don't have an airport down here. We don't have a nuclear plant. I mean, the nuclear plant is a lot farther away. So shall I just amend that document?
No, because it doesn't matter. It should be a statewide document. The goal is for it to be something that would apply everywhere. Um, and the whole point is that some of them are going to be relevant to you, some of them are not.
Okay.
So, but yeah, no, I wouldn't worry about amending it. The thing is it'll get added to, like when Rhonda brought up the thing about the what are they, FPAS or whatever the stuff that's in the microplastics that are in the Neuse River stuff. We added that, even though that's not really an issue in Raleigh. It's an issue elsewhere. And so, yeah, we want that to be as comprehensive as possible with the knowledge that it can't include everything. There's no way to have everything on one list, but we want to have as much as we can.
And then real quick, just a note about Sweet Assist. And again, we'll probably have a video with some more visuals, but Sweet Assist needs to be entered shortly after you're under contract, not waiting until you've closed or you have a check that you're getting ready to turn in. Again, it helps the firm understand what's in the pipeline. And you don't submit anything in Sweet Assist. I know it seems like you should, but you don't. So really when you're in Sweet Assist, you're entering details. And I'll also say, Brian, maybe you can back this up, but I think the plan for the details was so that the firm could have some metrics on what's going on in our market or our firm. So if you take the time to enter in your due diligence fee, the listing price versus the contract price, I think those metrics can be measured at some point. So take some time to fill out that details section.
Yeah, that's why some of those items are required. And so in order for you to move through the processes so that we do have that data that we can then utilize. We haven't pulled together reports on that at this time, but that having that data there will be really helpful for everybody.
It's only as good as what we put into it. So when you're in Sweet Assist, you'll enter the details page. You'll jump to the contacts page. So if you have a split with another agent, that's where you're going to do that, and you need to do it well before you close. And then you're going to jump over to the CDA tab, and that's where you'll enter your commission information. That is also where you would put in an outside referral, would be in that section there. So those are just surface level, just mentioning those couple of things just while we had this platform today. Thought we'd toss that out there, but we're getting real close to 11, and I figure maybe Brian wants to end with something.
Yeah.
Could I
Well, I'll
add
just
two more
Oh,
things
go ahead.
real quick?
please.
I was just going to mention, especially since we had Kara and Allie on this call, be sure that you're getting your ABA disclosures filled out when you're getting your buyer agency agreement paperwork filled out, especially if you're closed. We have to have that signed with every buyer, but especially if you're closing with Sterling Law, they're going to need that really early on in the contract process so they can begin title work. And it's really helpful. They reach out to me to get those ABAs just to save you guys a step. And if it's already signed and in the loop, I can quickly send that to them and they can go ahead and start working on title. Again, with what Allie said about the rebate letters, if you need a rebate letter, I fill out, I send lots of these out every week, but it will need Brian's, on letterhead, and it will need Brian's signature for them to know that it's okay for you to give that rebate to your client. You can just email me with that information. I'll need the address, the client that's getting that rebate, and the amount of the rebate. I can quickly turn that around for you. So you don't need to reach out to Brian to get that. You can just send that to me. Thank you so much, Kelly, for going over all those helpful, all that information about how to make compliance and all that run smoothly.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And we try not to. There are things that we have amended in our Dotloop in the past. We try not to require things just for the heck of it. If it's there's a reason for it. If you have questions about that, ask us. Over time, again, there are some things that we have removed over time because we determined that the way things are done now, it was no longer needed. For example, we don't require a copy of deposit checks, of due diligence fee. I asked the real estate commission about that. I said, for as long as I've been in real estate, every brokerage asks for a copy of the check, but I don't see it anywhere as a required document from the real estate commission. And they said, Well, it's not required from us. Brokerages can do whatever they want, but that's not a required item. And so I said, well, why do we have copies of checks with account numbers and sometimes driver's license numbers, just sitting there? We don't need that if we don't need it. So the commission's perspective was, you have a check being written from a buyer to a seller. That has nothing to do with us. We don't need to have a copy of that check. The receipt of monies is not a requirement from the real estate commission. It is a requirement of the firm. And it's in North Carolina realtors. They are the ones that insist that be part of our contract, because it protects us to make sure the money got to where it was supposed to go. So occasionally I'll get pushback from a clever agent saying, well, this thing isn't a requirement. And I said, well, it's a requirement for us. It may not be from the real estate commission, but it is from us, and it's for your protection. That's one example of that. So that's it. So I guess thank you, Kelly, for doing this. I know that compliance isn't everybody's strong suit. Most people don't get into real estate because of compliance. And then like all the stuff that Kara went through and that Allie went through and then Kelly went over, it's like, these aren't things that we're not supposed to know all of this stuff. The point is to lean on the professionals. So whether you're using Sterling Law, I hope you are, but whether you are or not, like, lean on your attorney. And if your attorney's not available to help you in real time, that's another reason why you should be using Sterling Law. You may have caught Kara say, text my bat phone. Well, you use Sterling Law, sometimes you get the bat phone, right? Like, they are there to be partners with us through the transaction. Allie's the same way. So if your current partners aren't doing that, like, we can't know all the answers to everything. I can't know. When you call me about an estate situation, I'm sure there are some of you on this call who have done that. What do I tell you? Call an attorney, right? Because they are the ones that need to be guiding us on that, not us thinking that we know the answer, but there's some nuance to it. So embrace that, own that we aren't supposed to have the answers. That's okay. That does not make you any less of an expert. But if you're having trouble, have questions, reach out so we can get you the answers. I think that's the point of all of this, is we want to know enough to know when we don't know. So
That's
awesome.
right.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's right. We just want a smooth closing with less delays.
That's right. It's okay to be like, I have no idea. Let me call somebody.
Let's
But that's
find
how you
out.
make it smooth. You make it unsmooth when you give a wrong answer. So
Yeah, don't recognize what you don't know. We don't know what we
yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, very good. Awesome, Kelly. Thank you so much for hosting this. Appreciate all you guys jumping on. It is recorded so that you can play it in like half speed for the part that Kara Gibbons was talking. So all right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.